Hello all. So today, as a part of my compact modeling video, I am going to talk about my most recent paper, which was on modeling of hysteretic losses in the output offset capacitance COSS of a power hemmed device. And so this presentation is going to be a part of my ASM GAN presentation series. Part one of which covered the statistical modeling using ASM GAN compact model, and a link is given in the description. The part two of this ASM GAN compact modeling series will now cover the hysteretic loss modeling using ASM GAN compact model. Okay, let's see how this goes. So you can actually check this paper out here in the solid state electronics, and the title of the paper is Analysis and Modeling of Off-State Hysteretic Losses in GAN Power HEMTs, and it will be instructive for you to see how the different aspects of the off-state output capacitance COSS have been modeled, and how, if you are a power electronic circuit designer, then how you can utilize it in your circuit simulations so that you predict the performance of the circuit a priori with much confidence. And if you are a compact modeling engineer in a power semiconductor industry such as Cree or EGAN, I think there is a company called EGAN which manufactures enhancement mode GAN HEMTs, and also Panasonic. So the device in this paper that has been modeled in detail is from Panasonic. So if you are any compact modeling engineer in these companies, then probably you will also get hints uh, how to better uh, how to better model the hysteretic losses in your compact model. So let's hope that this presentation gives you a heads up uh, in your endeavor to make your work better. So following is the outline of this presentation. First, I will go through prior important work on modeling of power GaN HEMTs, in which I will discuss in short how the process agnostic version of ASM GaN compact model works, and what is the model topology, and which things have been modeled in that Verilog A code. Then as an example of using that process agnostic model, I will take a packaged commercial power hem device from Panasonic by the name PGA26E19BA, and I would show you how the IV and CV characteristics of that hem were modeled. With this as the basis, then I will cover the hysteretic loss modeling of the same device, and in that I will first discuss the Sawyer-Tower setup, how this Sawyer-Tower setup measures the nonlinear capacitance of a device. Then, in order to model the measurements using Sawyer-Tower setup, how I use the linear ASR model, and then how I came up with a non-linear ASR model, because there was something that was not being modeled by the linear ASR model, and that something got modeled by non-linear ASR model, and we'll see what it was. It was basically the shape of the VDS versus QoS characteristics, the shape of the bulge and the location of the bulge and everything. So that was modeled using the nonlinear ESR model. Then a physical interpretation of the hysteretic losses based on trapping, and many recent studies are pointing to the to trapping as the source of the hysteretic losses, and not to any dielectric loss theory. So this is very important. The linear ASR model's interpretation lies in the dielectric loss theory, whereas it seems that the nonlinear ASR model corresponds to something that is happening because of trapping. And that link, maybe a researcher who works on the link between the nonlinear ASR model and trapping could be the researcher who maybe publishes the next TPEL paper or next TED paper. And finally, I will go through practical uses of my both the linear and nonlinear ASR models. So, as was explained even in my previous part 1 of ASM GAN compact model series, wherein I explained the statistical model, even in that I explained this concept of process agnostic model. What do you mean by process agnostic? It means that for most of the power devices, you don't have the let's say the AlGaN thickness and doping and all those that information that goes into a particular semiconductor 3-5 process. So what you do is that you create a new version of that compact model, which I did for ASM GAN, and let's say merge some of the model parameters, or made the model parameters such that they no longer are a function of the given process input, and you can easily extract them for the measured DC IV or CV characteristics. And this figure 1 shows the package level model of a power HEMT, which is to be extracted from the DC IV and CV measurements. And as you can see, that package level model consists of the intrinsic device, okay, which is the containing the series drain, gate and source resistances, and the actual intrinsic device, AlGaN HEMT device. And as I said, the model parameters of this intrinsic device have been remodeled in the process agnostic version, and you can check all those model parameters and what they do in this TPEL paper titled Physics Oriented Device Model for Packaged GaN Devices. All right. And the model parameter extraction using the DC, IV and CV measurements has also been explained in this paper. So I will not get into detail of how that thing happens. But suffice to say, this model is also, the origin of this topology actually is in the RF modeling, and it goes way back to Dambreen's model which was expounded in the 1980s, and all the early work in the on 3-5 modeling of 3-5 HEMTs in the early 1980s and late 1980s. And so however, even though this work starts with that, however, the final result is something kind of different and more sophisticated, because I've used a already established compact model ASM GAN to model a power HEMT device. So the final, the model is much sophisticated than those that were the 80s work, simply because of the existence of Verilog A, which was not available at that time. And suffice to say, for extracting the power HEMT device, packaged power HEMT device, I actually utilize the RF topology of the HEMT device, and maybe fine-tuned it to suit the modeling of a power HEMT device. All right. Now, if I apply VDS EXT and VGS EXT to be 0 volt, and then measure the S parameters from the input to output, which I did, and by making VDS EXT, VGS EXT 0 volt, what I am doing, I am basically converting this device into a cold FET topology. All right, the cold FET topology of the same power HEMT, and it looks like this. And as you can see, the CPG, CPD have been eliminated, because as is shown in the paper, these capacitances CPG, CPD make no difference And this is expected. Why? Because the package uh, capacitances to ground from the leads should be very a minuscule component of the overall package inductances and resistances. So this is expected, right? So unlike RF power hemps wherein you have actual pad, there is a pad, and from the pad the the this inductance is corresponds to the ground source ground configuration of the drain, gate and source, whereas in this case these inductances correspond to the inductances of the package leads, right? And as you can expect, the package lead to the ground capacitance should be very negligible. It should not contribute to the topology, and that is what I found in my studies. So you can safely neglect these. So ultimately, what you have is the series inductance and series resistance for all the nodes for a power hem device, playing a major part in its modeling. And so, coming back to the cold fit topology, what I found out that in addition to the package inductances, you have this CGDO, CGSO, and CDSO as the only model elements that are being added by the compact model. Everything else, that is the intrinsic CGS, CGD, CDS, they are minuscule, they are neglectable, they are zero. So the only thing that is existing now are the extrinsic parasitic components, which are CGDO, CGSO, and CDSO. Note that the same model parameters in BSIM correspond to the overlap capacitances, whereas in ASM GaN, these correspond to the package parasitic capacitances. Not only package, they are also due to the semiconductor layers of various semiconductor layers of the 3-5 process cross section. So the various semiconductor layers and the package together, they are basically adding these parasitics in the off state of the device or cold fit topology of the device. So in the paper you can see that I have modeled these using the S parameter measurements, wherein the imaginary part of Z11 leads to the tuning of LG and LS. The imaginary part of Z22 leads to the tuning of LD and LS, and imaginary part of Z21 or Z12, which are same, lead to the tuning of LG and LD. So together, the imaginary parts are going to give you LG, LD, and LS. You can extract LG, LD, and LS from this topology. Whereas CGDO, CGSO, and CDSO, they are actually extracted from the off-state off-state CV meter measurements, which will be shown in the next slide. How they have been modeled. All right. So let's see how for a commercial power hem device how the DC IV characteristics were modeled. Let's see that in the next slide. So following slide shows the figure 3 shows the IV characteristics modeling of a commercial power GaN hem device from Panasonic. And as you can see that this resistance Ron of around 147 milliohms has been modeled approximately here, and VGS from I guess 1 volt to 4 volt has been modeled, and the drain voltage is going from 0 to 10 volt, and the current is going from 0 to approximately 26 milliampere. Now, using the process agnostic version model topology, as I explained in the previous slide, I was able to model the linear saturation and self-heating regions of the transistor. The self-heating region is basically here, as I am showing here, for high VDS and VGS, and that is modeled using the internal thermal network of the ASM GaN compact model. Then also use the ASM GaN model's mobility, source and access region, resistance, etc. parameters, which were of course converted into process agnostic model parameters, and they were used to extract to match the overall data. And then I also found out that modeling of the R-on, that is the on-state resistance, is the key to predict the on-state and the switching losses of a transistor from on to off state. Okay. and that is explained in the in the TPEL paper, which is mentioned here. All right. Next, I also model the off-state CV measurements, in which you can see the CRSS, the COSS, and the and the uh, CISS. All right. Now, what is CRSS? CRSS is basically CGD, and the CGD of the device is exhibits two kinks. Okay. So if I walk backwards, let's say from 100 volt towards 0 volt, the first kink, so at 100 volt everything is depleted, so it's just the purely, so this region is purely the depletion capacitance. Okay. And that would have acted if the field, if this gate field plate and the source field plate would not have been there, then without the field plate it would be just the depletion capacitance as a function of VDS. That would have been the case. However, the presence of the gate field plate and the source field plate, what happens, what it does is that at this voltage around 72 volts, the source field plate turns on. And if the source field plate turns on, then what will happen? It will add its own capacitance component to the CGD, and that is what the data shows. This is the turning on of the source field plate. So that is going to add the extra charge and hence the extra capacitance to the CGD. So that is modeled by the and hence this portion is modeled by the source field plate. Now at around this voltage, which is around 9 or 10 volts, what's happening is the gate field plate is turning on, because the threshold voltage of gate voltage is, the magnitude is lesser than the source field plate because of the overall the dielectric thickness of the gate field plate compared, which is less than the total dielectric thickness of the source field plate, right? So now at this lower threshold voltage, the gate field plate is turning on, and if the gate field plate along with the source field plate turns on, it's going to add still extra capacitance of the gate field plate transistor, right, which is this one, right? So that adds the extra capacitance, and ultimately at VDS equal to 0, VGS equal to 0, it is the kind of this entire capacitance that is adding to the CGD, and that's around 100 picofarads here, right? So this is the CGD. Now CGD plus CDS is the COSS, which is then modeled here. You can see the gate field plate turning on, and this is the CGD component adding to the COSS. You can see here, right? And at the same time, CGD plus CGS is CISS, which is the orange curve, all right, which is also correctly modeled with the modeling of the field plates, right? And then figure 4 on the left hand side shows the origin of the capacitance COSS. As you can see, it is not only this dielectric, but also the passivation layer, and also if you to this capacitance in the offstate will be added the offstate parasitic component due to the package and leads and everything, which is not shown in this figure, right? So COSS is a conglomerate of all the parasitic basically components of the device. Now coming back to the topic, using the process agnostic version and the model topology as I showed in the first slide, I was able to model both the on-state and off-state capacitances, and use the gate and source field plate models to match the data, as I already explained this figure 5 in detail, and then found that modeling the COSS is key to predict the switching losses of transistor from off to on state. From the off to on state. Why? Because the COSS exists in the off state, it gets charged by the leakage current, and then it discharges in the on state through the resistance RDS on, right? So that loss is half times COSS times the VDS square, right? So that is the loss. So that is the key to predict the switching losses from off to on state. All right. So let's proceed further. So now that everything is clear, what the prior work was there, right? Now I would like to talk about the hysteresis loss modeling of the same Panasonic's power HEMT device, which is PGA26E19BA. And as you can see in the left hand side figure, you have a large signal, a small signal sinusoidal voltage source with the uh, frequency F sine applied to a power amplifier, and the property of this power amplifier is that it is working from megahertz to 35 megahertz range. So 35 megahertz is its bandwidth, and its output is fully rectified sinusoidal uh, output. So so the voltage from Y to the ground, node Y to the ground, is a fully rectified sinusoid of some frequency F sine. All right. Now, if you see the gate and source of the external of the this transistor, which is an enhancement mode transistor of the threshold voltage of approximately 1.8 volt. So, so this PGA26E BA family, this family itself has a threshold voltage of around 1.8 volt. So if I short its gate and source terminals, VGS will be 0 volt always, and hence this transistor is always right now in the off state. And then what is the component that is now coming here? It is the CGD plus CDS. That is the, and that is what? That is the COSS of the device, right? So suffice to say, this setup is trying to measure the non-linear capacitance COSS of the device under test, which is called as DUT. In series with this is a highly linear capacitor CX, whose value is much greater than the maximum value of COSS. Why do we do this? We do this because we want to measure the charge QoSS, which is nonlinear charge, which is going to be accumulated across COSS by the relation QoSS is equal to Vx times Cx. So the voltage terminal as developed at terminal X is now the directly proportional to the charge, the nonlinear charge QoSS across the nonlinear capacitance COSS. And why I am saying the charge will be same? Why? Because if there are two capacitances in series, then the charge accumulated across each capacitance is same, and in this case it is equal to COSS. So this explains the Sawyer-Tower setup in short. All right. Now right hand side presents the same Sawyer-Tower setup in simulation. So as you can see, the PA is gone, because in simulation what I am going to do, suppose the peak voltage is 610 volts across the device, okay, across the device, which is shown here. And as you can see, LD, which is between DXT and D, is 0, and LS, which is between G/SEXT and SI, is 0. What does it mean is that in the simulation, even though I started with simulating it with the package model, with the package inductances, what I found was that if I include the inductances, it produced oscillations in the low voltage area, which is ringing in the low voltage area. But however, in the data, I was not able to see that low voltage ringing. So somehow the value of inductance is extracted for this device. If you keep, it produces the ringing. However, probably in the measurement, the Stanford guys who measured this device in the Sawyer-Tower setup, they were not able to probably they were able to eliminate that ringing using filtering techniques. So for example, if you use a series capacitor, you can filter out the what can you filter out? You can filter out the DC or low voltage ringing, right? DC or low voltage ringing, you can filter it out. So they use probably some kind of filtering techniques to eliminate the low voltage ringing, and that's the reason I'm keeping LD, LS, and LG equal to 0. And once I keep that, so EXT and D are same, and S slash G EXT and S are same. So ultimately, it's only the intrinsic device that is coming into picture, right? And in the for the off state, you basically only have COSS, which is CGD plus CDS, and both are nonlinear capacitances. Now the thing is, uh, in order to model now the loss that is happening across this capacitance COSS, what do I need to do? I need to, in circuit theory, how can you represent the losses? Because capacitance, which is the COSS here, is a purely reactive element. It doesn't dissipate any energy across it. The only way you can represent the dissipation of energy is across a resistor in circuit theory. And that's the reason, in order to represent the loss that is happening in this capacitance COSS, I added a series resistance ESR, all right, across the capacitance COSS in order to model the loss that is happening across this capacitance COSS. Note that the value of ESR, extracted ESR from the data, has always come out to be much less than 1 by omega COSS, that is the capacitive reactance, which means that the voltage developed across the terminals D and S and Di and S is approximately same. Alright, because the voltage drop across ESR is much less because of its value being much less than the inductive reactance, right? Sorry, capacitive reactance of COSS. So this also, you see that I am applying a frequency of f sine by 2. Now why so? The reason is that a fully rectified sinusoidal source across the terminal Y and the ground, okay, can be represented by a corresponding sinusoidal input of frequency f sine by 2, okay, that frequency f by 2, and with the limited phase angle from 0 to pi, okay, from 0 to pi. So that is the reason why I am giving a frequency of f sine by 2 to represent a fully rectified sinusoidal source of f sine. All right. Now, what is the relationship between the peak voltage across the terminals D and S and the V peak source? If you apply the voltage division rule, and for the extracted values of ES are always less than 1 by omega COSS, what you get, V peak divided by V peak source is equal to Cx by Cx plus COSS at VDS equal to V peak, right? So you can apply voltage division rule and you can prove this. So what I did is that I calibrated my V peak source in terms of the measured V peak across the device. So for example, if I want to apply 610 volt across D to S, I have to apply some, let's say 630, 640 volt here to get the voltage drop of 610 volt here. So that is how I fine-tuned the V peak source to apply the corresponding waveform across the Y and ground, Y and X, as measured in the data from the Stanford from the work of the Stanford group, which measured this Sawyer Tower measurements. So this is a very important this is a very important, I will say, step towards modeling the SOIOT or large signal measurement setup. So one thing I forgot to tell you on the previous slide was that uh, why I said that uh, the uh, the phase angle, limited phase angle 0 to pi, is because what I am interested in modeling is a steady state waveform. Steady state waveform that is being developed across the device. That steady state waveform is going to repeat after the phase angle of 0 to pi for a frequency of f sine by 2. And that is the reason I am just going to simulate a transient waveform by giving the steady state initial conditions across the device, and that has been explained in the appendix A of my PhD thesis in detail. So those who are interested in knowing more about it, they should refer to the appendix A of my PhD. Now, coming back to the ESR modeling of the COSS, I would like to point out or talk about the origin of ESR, which lies in the dielectric theory of absorption. Now, this dielectric theory of absorption was developed way back in 30s and 40s and was perfected by Debye in the year 1959. All right, this is a very old theory, and I'm going to explain that theory in detail now, because if I don't tell you the theory of dielectric absorption, everything else that I have used to model this the hysteretic losses will not be clear to you. So the time evolution of the resultant orientational polarization when a sinusoidal electric field phasor E naught e raised to power j omega t that is applied in to a solid dielectric containing permanent dipoles. Okay, now the dipole moment could be permanent, as in case of the AlGaN-GaN HEMT device, which contains permanent dipoles in both the AlGaN and GaN layers. The same kind of losses have also been observed in silicon superjunction and devices and silicon carbide devices. In case of silicon superjunction devices, it's not the permanent dipole moments. It is the pillar of charges, the pillar of depletion charges that exist, the pockets of majority carriers in the depleted regions of the silicon superjunction HEMTs. The modulation of those charges contribute to the hysteretic losses, and so for silicon superjunction the mode is different. All right. However, for so that is the mode of dielectric loss for silicon superjunction. For gallium nitride devices, if I am applying a small signal, then it is these permanent dipole moments that those are present. They try to get rotated when you are applying a sinusoidal phasor to this dipole moment, and that can be represented by a resultant current vector, which is now leading the applied voltage phasor by an angle of pi by 2 minus delta, as you can see in this phasor diagram, wherein the E naught, this is the applied phasor diagram, the phasor representation of the applied electric field, and this is the phasor representation of the uh, of the the ideal capacitor component, ideal capacitive current component, which would have led the applied voltage phasor by pi by 2 radians, right? So that is proportional, and also that is proportional to the omega epsilon naught epsilon r dash e naught, which is, so it is also proportional to the real part of the uh, dielectric constant, whereas the imaginary part of the dielectric constant corresponds to the dielectric losses, right? And so the resultant current vector leads the voltage vector by pi by 2 minus delta and lags the ideal capacitive current component by an angle delta, which is also called as the tan of the delta is also called as the loss tangent, right? According to the theory. Now, when you apply such a sinusoidal electric field, you get a resultant polarization proportional to the E naught cos omega t, which is the applied electric field, and E naught sin omega t, which lags the applied field by 90 degrees. So the first term is in phase, and that's why that term, which is the 1 by 1 plus omega square tau square, does not contribute to the dielectric losses, whereas the second term, which is multiplying the E naught sin omega t, which is omega tau by 1 plus omega square tau square, that term contributes to the dielectric losses. And when do the dielectric losses reach their peak? When the frequency, applied frequency, reaches 1 by tau, right? Which is when this term will become maximum, right? When omega will be 1 by tau, then this term will reach the maximum, and the dielectric losses also will reach the maximum, right? Because the polarization electric field, the component of that which is out of phase with the applied electric field, that will reach the maximum, right? And that corresponds to the condition wherein what? That corresponds to the condition wherein the energy stored is also maximum, right? Whereas if the dipoles get aligned with the applied electric field, then the energy stored is minimum. Whereas if the dipole get misaligned, or if they are 90 degree to the applied electric field, then the energy stored is maximum, right? So that is the reason this term is contributing to the energy loss, whereas this term is not, which is in phase with the polarization component, which is in phase with the applied electric field, that is not at all going to contribute to the energy losses. So this, by the way, this can also be proven for let's say a molecule or atom jumping from one energy state to another. So that component can also have these two, 1 by 1 plus omega square tau square, or omega tau divided by 1 plus omega square tau square. This is also valid for electronic polarization. So what is electronic polarization? If you apply electric field, the electron cloud gets displaced for an atom, and that itself creates a dipole moment. So this can also correspond to the electronic polarization. This can also correspond to this expression in general. So this is for orientational polarization as a function of time. This can also be derived, okay? This can also be derived for other phenomena. All right, similar expressions can be derived for other phenomena, such as transition of an atom from a higher state to a lower state, because that can also contribute to the dielectric constant of the solid. Okay, sometimes in the textbooks they also talk about if it's an ionic crystal, okay, then the ion can transition from one energy state to another energy state, and that can also have these components which are proportional to 1 by 1 plus omega square tau square and omega tau by 1 plus omega square tau square. In any case, the time constant tau will give you the idea about the time the time at which that phenomenon reaches 1 by E of its maximum value, right? So time constant tau will basically talk about the response of that phenomena, whether it's the ions getting transition from higher energy state to lower energy state, or the dipole moment due to orientational polarization transitioning from high state, giving rise to the polarization in the solid. and so on and so forth. All right. So this, in short, is what is this dielectric theory is. So whenever you measure a capacitance using CV meter or impedance analyzer, okay, suppose you measure at COSS, so you apply VDC plus small sinusoidal signal source, and you measure the capacitance, then you will see that you will get both the dissipation factor and a COSS value and a ESR value, you know, using the CV meter. And so so that can be related to the variation of the polarization, or the variation of the shifting of atom from one state to another, molecule from one state to another, or any other any other process that can happen in that solid or liquid. All right. So this is the origin of the ESR. So ESR, so this dielectric loss is now going to be represented by a resistive element ESR, okay, which is effective series resistance. So in this sense, that ESR is no more a physical resistance. It is a resistance that is representing the losses of due to this dielectric absorption in terms of ohmic losses across the ESR. All right. So this is the actual interpretation of the ESR of a capacitance. So according to the theory of dielectric absorption, it can also be more proved that the characteristic time constant, okay, the characteristic time constant, which is also called dipolar time relaxation time constant of the combined vertical dielectric stack of the device, okay, it can be expressed as tau is equal to ESR times COSS. Okay, so you can refer to Decker's book, A.J. Decker's book, and in the third chapter, problem number 3, this relationship between the ESR and the capacitance has been proven. So don't take this relationship as it is, coming from the first order RC network analysis, because that impedance analysis leads to the same expression for the time constant, okay, which is R times C. However, this is not circuit theory. This is dielectric loss theory being represented by the ohmic loss across the resistor ESR. That in that case also, the time constant of the dielectric dipole relaxation can actually also be proven again to be the product of R times C. So please remember this distinction, because if you forget this distinction, you will treat the ESR as a normal resistor, whereas it is not a normal resistor. In this case, it is representing the loss across the COSS. Thus, ESR is an indicator of the time response of the dielectric system. Note that its presence decreases both the quantum of energy stored across ESS because of the voltage drop across the ESR, right? So because of that voltage drop, if the actual voltage across the COSS will be less than the applied voltage, right? And also the presence of ESR decreases the quality factor of COSS, and quality factor is the ratio of what? Ratio of the reactive energy stored divided by the resistive energy stored. So the more the ESR, lesser will be the quality factor, right? Also, it can be proven that in the energy loss per switching cycle, which is EDISS. Now, remember this energy loss per switching cycle of the off-state capacitance COSS is, I am representing it by EDISS. It can be proven that it comes out proportional to the dV by dt of the applied waveform, and also the ESR. All right. So this has been proven in my solid state electronics paper, which I talked about, which is what I'm presenting in this presentation. That is analysis and modeling of off-state hysteretic COSS losses in GaN power HEMTs. All right. Now the figure here shows the measured quality factor versus frequency from this paper number 13 in my paper, which has been measured at VDC equal to 40 volt and then a sinusoidal voltage of some few millivolts superimposed on it using a impedance analyzer. Now what do you see here? You see that different gallium nitride and silicon carbide devices were measured and they were benchmarked against a 2 nanofarad mica capacitor. You can see that mica capacitor has got more quality factor than all these COSS of silicon carbide or GaN power HEMTs, and that quality factor can vary by 1 to 3 orders of magnitude, right? Now this quality factor, remember, it is 1 by dissipation factor. All right, and remember that this trend is showing a general trend of increasing dissipation factor for both gallium nitride and silicon carbide technologies for switching frequency higher than 1 megahertz. Okay, and why I'm talking about switching frequencies greater than 1 megahertz is because the whole purpose of using GaN devices for power electronic converters is that you can increase the switching frequencies to megahertz range. Currently these power converters are designed in the range of hundreds of kilohertz, and you want to increase the switching frequencies because you want to reduce the inductor footprint, mainly the inductor footprint, because most of the power electronic circuits work on charging the inductor and discharging the inductor, and via using the HEMT or FET switches or field effect transistor switches, right? Whether you take boost converter, buck boost converter, or DC AC converter, AC DC converters, most of these converters work on the principle of charging an inductor and discharging an inductor, and then using the capacitances to again store the energy and transfer the energy, right? So this is how power electronic circuits work. And so in order to reduce the footprint of inductor, that is to go from PCB to IC, okay, what will you have to do? You will have to increase the switching frequency, and that is where the AlGaN HEMTs and silicon carbide devices have been the topic of research. And as you can see, gallium nitride devices are much better than the corresponding silicon carbide devices in the frequency range of greater than 1 megahertz, whereas in some hundreds of kilohertz or less than 100 of kilohertz, maybe silicon carbide devices are better for lower frequencies, but for higher frequencies, switching frequencies, gallium nitride commercial gallium nitride power devices are better. And so this graph proves that point. All right. Also, what it proves is that for a frequency greater than 1 megahertz, both silicon carbide and gallium nitride devices show a decreasing trend in quality factor or increasing trend in the dissipation factor. Okay. And as we saw in the previous slide, what this corresponds to, increasing dissipation factor corresponds to increasing value of the imaginary part of the dielectric constant, right? Or the term which is corresponding to the imaginary part of dielectric constant, that is omega tau divided by 1 plus omega square tau square. So this increasing trend can be related now to the term omega tau divided by 1 plus omega square tau square. So when this will reach the minimum, that term would have reached its maximum. All right, and then after that, again the quality factor will this is decreasing, right? So dissipation factor is increasing. It will hit the bottom, or the dissipation factor will reach its maximum, and then the dissipation factor will go up, right? Again make because why? Because the imaginary part of dielectric constant will now the term omega tau by 1 plus omega square tau square will now decrease to 0, and that's why again this will come back to the normal level, right? So this will decrease and then again increase to the normal level. So this is what this trend is showing, right? And a ramification of this is will be visible when I will show you the modeling results for this Panasonic's device. So figure in the 9 shows a simulated steady state VDS waveform and a QoS waveform simulated for a frequency of 5 megahertz, which means that in order to represent a one steady state cycle, one steady state fully rectified cycle of VDS, okay, that which is basically 200 nanosecond, I will have to apply a sinusoidal voltage source of 2.5 megahertz, right, which will basically extend like this. However, I am representing the steady state cycle from one steady state cycle, because analysis of one steady state cycle is enough to model the energy loss, because EDISS is the, so EDISS is going to be the hysteretic energy loss, which is going to be under the VDS versus QoS characteristics, which is the shaded region. As you can see here, the blue shaded region is for the simulated characteristics and the red shaded region is the for the measured characteristics. And before I come to this right hand side figure, I would like to discuss the left hand figure in more detail. Okay, so VDSC is the charging voltage and VDSD is the discharging voltage. So for the value of ESR equal to 0, this will be perfectly sinusoidal, right? However, for some value of ESR, and for the, in this case the peak voltage is 610 volts and the applied F sign is 5 megahertz. That is a fully rectified frequency is 5 megahertz. What is there is that the simulated and both measured and simulated are asymmetrical. So that's why the charging and discharging VDS will be different. All right. Similar thing will be for the QoSS, which will be asymmetrical during the charging and discharging process. And the maximum value of QoSS is QoSS max, whereas the initial starting value of the QoSS is 0. Both VDS and QoSS initial and final values are 0, and this is also observed in the measured data. So the same plot using cadence, you can plot VDS versus QoSS by selecting the option plot Y versus Y. Is a plot Y versus Y option in cadence, and you can using that you can plot VDSS, okay, versus QoSS like this. And as you can see, the simulation using linear ASR model, even though the areas are same, okay, but the shape is totally different. So the linear ASR model, which is based on the dielectric theory of absorption, can model the Sawyer-Torr setup, which is a large signal measurement setup. Okay, it can model the energy loss, the hysteretic energy loss, but it cannot model, what my work shows is that it cannot model the actual shape, the dynamic shape of the measured characteristics. Okay, now that is something that is to be now fixed. Okay, however, I was able to model the entire measured data from 5 megahertz to 35 megahertz, and those results are shown in the next figure. So figure 11 and 12 show the actual modeled data for EDISS per cycle versus the peak voltage across the DUT as a function of frequency. So left hand side is for 5 megahertz, right hand side is for 10 megahertz. Remember that 5 megahertz, which means the applied frequency in the simulation is 2.5 megahertz. For the this has 10 megahertz, which is fully rectified frequency of 10 megahertz. The applied frequency in the simulation is 5 megahertz, right? So I was able to model by varying the value of ESR manually. I was able to fit the measured data of energy loss per cycle both as a function of frequency and a bias. Okay, frequency and a bias. And this EDIS is equal to f sine proportional to f sine times V peak. That is a f frequency and bias. This is also called as Steinmetz fit. So this is just an empirical fit which shows that the energy loss per cycle can be fitted as a function of the switching frequency and the bias. All right. So, and the significance of this fit is explained in detail in my paper. So I would strongly recommend to you to go through this paper, my solid state electronics paper, in order to understand what is the Steinmetz fit. Okay. Suffice to say, I was able to do this exercise till 35 megahertz of the measured data, and using the linear ASR model. But as uh, as discussed from the previous slide, this model, linear ASR model, was not able to model the dynamic VDS versus QoS characteristics. And so in order to model those dynamic VDS versus QoS characteristics, I was then compelled to use two things. One is non-linear value of ESR, which is empirical, okay, and an extra non-linearity in the CDS component of the COSS, and that I will explain in the next slide. So figure 13, which is the left hand side figure, shows the simulated value when I introduced a non-linearity in the ESR as a function of VDS. Let's say some constant A times VDS square. Okay. So if I introduce like that, what I saw was that the shape of this linear ASR model shifted to kind of this concave shape, okay, for charge and discharge. So remember, the charge is like this and the discharge is like this. Charge is like this and discharge is like this, okay. So charge is the upper trace and the discharge is the lower trace. So I was able to shift the shape to a concave curvature by using this NLESR value. But again, I was not, so as you can see, there is also a shift in the bulge from the lower QoS value to the higher QoS value. That I was able to achieve using by adding the extra nonlinear component to the CDS component of COSS by adding this extra model parameter CDSL, which is a function of, which is multiplying VDS, right? So for each bias value V peak, let's say for a frequency of 5 megahertz, f sine of 5 megahertz, I was able to model the data for EDISS per cycle, as you can see here in the red dots. I was able to model in the simulation, but by keeping value of A different. So now A is actually a function of the bias. A, which is the NLESR coefficient, is actually now a function of bias. And then this puzzle now comes into, there is this new question now. Why is not A constant? Why A is decreasing as the bias is increasing? Right? So that is the obvious question. However, suffice to say, by introducing these empirical expressions, I was able to model the non-linear behavior of the VDS versus QoS characteristics, or basically this is the non-linear behavior. That is this concave curvature and the shifting of the bulge from the lower value to higher value of both VDS and QoS. That is the non-linear behavior of this COSS, and that I was able to model using the NLESR and the extra component of non-linearity in the CDS component. So in order to see why A is a function of bias, I evaluated NLESR average, and I defined it as the average value of ESR, nonlinear ESR, sorry, over a entire cycle, which is pi, right? So 1 by pi integral 0 to pi A V peak square, which is the NLESR, times sine square omega t by 2 d omega t by 2. So that comes out to be a times v peak square by 4, and if I plot that as a function of maximum value of dvds by dt, I got a straight line. Now if I substitute this relationship, that is NLESR average is proportional to m times dvds by dt max plus some constant c. If I use this expression and you know and derive the approximate expression for EDSS average, that comes up to be like this big expression. And you can see that now this expression is proportional to dE by dt square and dE by dt across the device. So the nonlinear ESR model, number one, predicts a loss proportional to both dV by dt and dV by dt square across the device. Okay? And NLESR average models the average response of the underlying phenomenon. That is clear. Why? Because the range of NLESR average is the same as the linear ESR, which I was extracting of 22 and 1718 ohms. Right? It is the same here. The range is same. So this is also the proof in the pudding. That is the NLESR average is in the range of the linear ESR. However, it models the dynamic VDS versus QoS characteristics and also models the dV by dt square dependence of the energy loss per cycle across COSS. Now, as far as the mechanism of NLESR model is concerned, it is unknown right now. But this situation is similar to what Max Planck found after introducing Planck's constant h in order to fit the black body radiation data, right? In our case, it is this unexplained empirically introduced model parameter A that needs a physical explanation. Right now it doesn't have, but I will discuss the most probable explanation which has been proved using TCAD by the same group from Stanford, which is the Devase's group. That explanation, relating that explanation to NLESR model, will be probably a one TED paper maybe, and that is something that I would strongly suggest to the researchers to pursue, whether that relationship exists or not. So figure 16 shows a possible physical mechanism of the hysteretic COSS losses, which have been depicted on the 3-5 cross-section process layers. So this 3-5 process cross-section was actually taken from the patent of the device, Panasonic's device PGA26E19BA, and you can see it consists of back electrode, which is connected to the source via the via hole and via metal, and then silicon is the substrate. There is a buffer layer, there is an undoped GaN layer, then AlGaN layer of 25 nanometer, then PGaN layer, which makes this device enhancement mode, and hence if VGS is equal to 0, the channel will be depleted as shown in this figure. Okay, and the source axis and drain axis region will contain 2D EG electrons, which are now going to be modulated by the drain to source electric field in the Sawyer Tower setup, right? Then on top of PGaN you have P plus GaN, and then palladium is the gate contact, Schottky contact metal. And so this this is the general now picture of what is actually now happening. As I apply VDS, remember the VDS in this case is a fully rectified, approximately fully rectified sinusoid. So as the VDS is increasing across the device, it is going to do, the 2D EG electron is going to recede away from the gate towards the drain, right? Go towards the drain, and as it approaches the drain, here you will have lot of 2D EG electrons which have gained high kinetic energy, and these highly energetic electrons can get injected via path C right? This is hot carrier injection. So path C is hot carrier injection. Now, because of the receding and again forwarding the 2D EG electrons here with the increasing and decreasing of VDS, this electron layer will again experience acceleration and deceleration, due to which some of them can again get injected into the buffer layer, and that is the path A. So these two paths have been clearly mentioned in the TCAD simulation. Whereas paths B and part D are the corresponding emission paths which the charge trap can follow. Now imagine a case wherein let's consider path C and D. If the time constant are same and that time constant is of the order of the applied waveform, and actually or less than the applied waveform, that is they are fast, okay, what will happen? What will happen to the hysteretic loss? Hysteretic loss will be minimal or zero. If these time constants are less than the applied period, whatever the charge is, it's as if there is no loss of the charge, okay, and I'm assuming that each charge that was getting captured has been released back into the into the 2D EG region. In that case, the hysteretic losses will be minimal and the dissipation factor will also be minimal, right? However, if the applied frequency is higher, that is the time of the VDS waveform is less and less compared to this trapping and detrapping time constants, then what can happen? Suppose, and also if suppose there is a asymmetry in trapping and detrapping, suppose the trapping is faster and detrapping is slower, and so that is detrapping constant is time constant is much larger than the applied waveform, whereas the trapping time constant is very fast. So the charges can now get trapped, but they cannot get released at the end of the cycle. Okay, what will happen to such trapped charges? When the bias becomes zero again, they can either stay there or they can get recombined, right? They can get recombined here in this semiconductor layer. Now this is what is the prime cause of the charge imbalance, and that charge imbalance is now going to lead to the hysteretic effect. Why? Because now the QoSs during charge and discharge will be different because some charge got lost in the process, and that is the basis of the hysteretic losses in the AlGaN-GaN HEMTs, and that was proven in detail in the detailed simulation TCAD study by the same Stanford group. All right, and which is the first and second reference in my paper. Now, you might ask me what are the practical uses of such modeling of off-state hysteretic losses. Remember that ideally, if you put a AlGaN-GaN HEMT in or silicon carbide HEMT in off-state, the loss should be zero, or the practically some loss of off-state current multiplied by the VDS across the device, that should be the loss. But what is happening? So before I talk about the off-state losses, let me say that the total losses are on-state plus off-state plus switching losses, right? Switching losses can be calculated in simulation by the overlap of VDS and IDS, right, across the device. On-state losses are IRMS square times R-on, right? They are fixed according to the duty cycle and the RMS current of the device, on-state RMS current. Whereas the off-state losses are in power electronic circuits, there are addition of CISS and COSS losses. Now CISS is CISS times VG over drive square, okay, energy loss. The COSS energy loss is, by conventional calculation, it is half COSS VDS max square. Why half? because during the charging it dissipates the power outside of the MOSFET device. So here I am talking about the power dissipation in the device, right? So that half COSS VDS max square is outside of the MOSFET during charging, whereas during discharge it dissipates half COSS VDS max, which is the remaining energy across the RDS on of the device. Okay, so however the total COSS loss is again COSS times VDS max square if you calculate the total CDS loss in the system, but across the device it is half, because it's only the during the on state that stored VDS max is going to get discharged to VDS linear, right? So that's why half, and plus the EDISS due to the ESR or NLESR, right? Now the point is this energy loss, which is the EDISS, what people have found out for the AlGaN HEMTs or silicon carbide devices, power devices, they are, let's say, 80 to 90% of this total loss, and that is the major problem. That is, this hysteretic loss is more than this other calculated losses, and that is why if you have a calibrated model either based on ESR or non-linear SR, then that compact model, if you use for designing your power electronic circuits, you will get correct loss in this loss calculation, and eventually the efficiency calculation of your power electronic circuit. So this is the first and the most important, I will say, practical use of this off-state hysteretic modeling. Another use could be to calibrate the hysteretic losses that are particular to the power device because of its particular packaging material or package configuration and particular 3-5 semiconductor layers, which can then be verified through combined package and die level EM simulation. And that you can use if you let's say do a package level EM simulation with the correct packaging material and correct bias dependent modeling of those package, then you can probably calibrate that bias dependence in the EM simulation using this calibrated hysteretic loss model of the device. So that could be, so this is kind of a, so this is like using a calibrated compact model to verify the packaging properties or material properties of the device, or backtrack the material, backtrack where the bias dependence in the packaging is coming from. So that kind of study can also be done. This has not been done, but this can and should be done in by the power electronic companies like Cree or these EGAN EGAN company. I think these they should definitely do this, and they should definitely do this off-state hysteretic loss modeling, because they are a major component of losses as the frequency of operation goes to megahertz regime, from kilohertz to megahertz regime. So this is in short an explanation for my paper which has been recently been published in Solid State Electronics. And thank you for listening to this. And if there are any questions, I would be very happy to answer your questions. Thanks a lot. Bye, and have a safe life in this COVID pandemic, and have a great day. Bye.